The revolution descended into the terror, appalling and brutal violence. And as the 19th century developed, so too did increasingly aggressive nationalism. It became militarized nationalism and culminated in the War of 1914-1918, which turned out to be Act One, with Act Two following in 1939-1945. European imperialism was finished in 1945. In Britain and Ireland, imperialistic religion, Christendom, lasted a little longer. In the 19th century, Europe was divided into historic and unhistorical nations. That's how they were described. The established powers of France, Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, and Greece. These, it was believed, all had a historic destiny or a sense of historic destiny. Others, such as the Romanians, Norwegians, Czechs, Poles, the Irish, the territories of the crumbling Ottoman Empire, they were unhistorical, struggling for the right to self-determination. Nationalism was shaped by 6 strands. 1, prehistory became important, proving an age-long struggle for rights and land. 2, language became standardized, proof of a nation's separate and unique identity. 3, folklore was unearthed as ancient cultural roots became important for authenticity. 4, religion was invoked to sanctify national identity and to place barriers between ethnic groups or imagined groups. And 5, racial theories became powerful and popular. The Aryan race. Every nation had a unique racial kinship. And then 6, throughout Europe, art and literature gave expression to national themes. Sir Walter Scott in Scotland invented the kilt. Musicians put together harmonies and rhythms, and national songs or anthems emerged. National cultures emerged. The nation was an imagined community, an invention, and nations created their own mythologies. These were the 6 foundational stones of nationalism that divided and othered peoples and led to the bloody and catastrophic 20th century. And one of the strands or foundation stones was religion. Nationalism was embedded in religion from the start. And Viktor Orban wants the national Christian ideology to regain supremacy, not only in Hungary, but in the whole of Europe. Well, we need to look very closely at religion. And as Europeans, we need to look closely at Christianity, where it has been, and what might become of it. We pause there and, by Maura's own admission, place ourselves at her mercy and see if we can end up in groups and have some kind of discussion around a couple of questions, maybe. The chance for the national Christian ideology to regain supremacy, not only in Hungary, but in the whole of Europe, was what Orban said. Now, what would that mean for Europe? Should it be countered? And then to ask ourselves, maybe, has religious nationalism gone in Ireland? Did it serve religion well? Okay, well, we'll come back to the World Cup if you like later on, but I want to look in the second half, what we call the death of God, but God lowercase. And we've already been saying religion has been closely connected to imperialism and to nationalism. Now, the Bible itself is critically aware of the marriage, not in relation to nationalism, because obviously nationalism did not exist in the world of Moses Amos, Jesus, and Paul. Their worlds were dominated by imperialism, a succession of empires and superpowers and domination systems. And it may be that we have been so much a part of an imperial world that we have sometimes failed to hear and recognize the critical and anti-imperial witness and struggle of the Mosaic, prophetic, Christo, and Pauline worlds. Now, much of our religion, I suppose, has been cultural, establishment, status quo, politicized, and identified with the political and the economic arrangements of power over others. And so we need to ask, what is religion? And this definition has been offered, insofar as we can make a definition, by some people in their book, The Practice of Global Ethics. And some may think it's unwise, even impossible, to define religion, but maybe it's worth a try. If for no other reason, we can identify what we have been part of. And religion has been described as a worldview, a value system, a way of life orientated around some conception of a special reality, fundamental truth, normative authority that is construed, alternatively as transcending, grounding, or deeply implicit in ordinary mundane reality. A religion provided its adherents with existential orientation and meaning, answers to fundamental questions about the world's origins, human destiny, the source and prevalence of suffering and evil, and proper comportment in the world of human relations. So religion provides personal social identity, cohesion, integration, and belonging, and also can mark the religious group off from others. Religion can be differential. Religion can also provide us with a sense of the unity of humankind, compassion towards all, and a sense of embracing the whole world in a way that is positive and life-enhancing. So far, so good. And this is religion, not just Christianity. But religion differentiates and can create an us and them. We have the truth, and we know the good, and we live rightly. They do not, or not as well as us. And this has been described as the Janus face of religion, if you like, two-faced religion. Religion can be life-affirming for all humanity, but also a religion can be superior to others and to become hostile to outgroups that by their very existence challenge the religious worldview, values, and way of life. Now, all religion becomes social practice, and that is true of either face presented by religion. Superiority and hostility, the very differential of religion, can impose discriminatory social and political policies. Religion can resort to forms of violence against others, and often religion can be bound up with racial identity. Religious identity becomes the marker for an ethno-national community. Romanians are Romanian Orthodox. Serbs are Serbian Orthodox. Croats are Catholics. Bosnians are Muslim. And the religious markers become involved, as they did, in ethnic cleansing and genocide. The murders and rapes which were carried out at the partition of India and Pakistan were part of the religio-political landscape. The demonization of the Jews was assisted by the German Protestant churches through the Aryanized Christian scripture and theology. The Catholic hierarchy in Germany was complicit by a deafening silence often, so as to continue to exist and be tolerated in the new Germany. So religion is Janus face, and we need to acknowledge that in history. And most of what we have cited from our European history has been Christian. This is what I suppose is disturbing about Viktor Orban's vision of a return to a national Christian ideology, as he unashamedly called it, and its Christian and white supremacy, and standing up for a Judeo-Christian identity in which the Jews will have no part along with others. One side of the Janus face of Christianity has been the political co-option of the Christian God. Or put another way, it is a national co-option of God. Jürgen Moltmann, German and leading Reformed theologian of the second half of the 20th century, he's now well in his 90s, he asked the question, who is the God of the German Constitution? Now, we might ask the same question of a number of constitutions or national iconic documents. Who is the God of the Irish Constitution? Who is the God of the Ulster Covenant and Easter Proclamation? Who is the God of the British motto, for God and Empire? Or those closer to home slogans, for God and Ulster, for God and Ireland? And who is the God of In God We Trust on the American dollar bill? Who is the God being prayed to on national occasions? Remembrance Sunday, the orange celebration of the centenary of Northern Ireland. Are these all make-believe gods, gods we have created in our imperial, political, or national images? British imperialism played the theology of God's chosen people, and therefore exceptionalism. So too did the American empire. The first settlers believing they were God's chosen and in their promised land. And when American fighter pilots bombed Vietnam and Iraq and then closed their training sessions in prayer, who was the God they prayed to? And why did they pray? And before the planes left to drop their atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they were blessed by the Lutheran and Catholic chaplains, an ecumenical gesture before an ecumenical God whose ecumenical embrace obviously didn't include the Japanese. But this was what Constantine was doing, or believed he saw and heard before the Battle of Milvian Bridge. According to the story, a cross in the clouds with the words, "In this sign, conquer," the imperial and the military co-option of God. This was a God of almighty power, a God shaped by empire, and the power of the imperial God is absolute and almighty, violent, and the imperial God's purposes are sure. They are the purposes of the empire. He, and this God is he, supports established earthly powers and is fully behind the aims of the imperium. This is God the Father Almighty of the Creed, with Constantine presiding over the council that formulated it. Canadian theologian Douglas John Hall put it rather starkly. He said, "An empire founded on military might, carefully layered structures of authority, the subordination of inferiors, and the unity of political intention and order, such an empire simply could not take as its primary religious cultus a faith whose deity struggles with the paradoxes of love and justice, forgives the gravest of offenders, punishes inordinate human pride and ambition, questions every authority structure, and listens to the pleas of the lowest citizens while putting down the mighty from their seats." Well, this was Christendom, the God of Christendom. And lest we forget it, it was Christendom that produced and created our Trinitarian and Christological thought in imperial images and thought forms. If Christendom has now died, has the God of Christendom also died? And if the imperial God of Christendom has died, if we have lived through this death of God, Is this then the end of religious nationalism? Is it the end of Christian nationalism? The end of a European national ideology? No more imperial delusions or imperial nostalgia? No more religious nationalism or Christian nationalism? If this co-opted nationalistic, imperialistic, and militaristic God is dead, what are we left with? What is faith? And what is prayer? Who or what are we talking to and trying to follow? Well, we are part of a religious tradition, European Christianity, that has for 1700 years commingled with imperial and political power. Maybe two things to say in closing this input. There has always been in Christianity the tradition that the most we can know of God is that we don't know. It is in our Jewish roots, which has always said that God cannot be named, because whatever we mean by God, God is beyond us. God is incomprehensible mystery and can never be named or imaged by human beings. Christendom perhaps didn't recognize that. It thought it knew and made God in its imperial and national image. Douglas John Hall again, quote, "But the great enemy of this God is the God of the prophetic tradition, who was always conceived critically, precisely over against this deification of the power principle." Maybe that's worth repeating. But the great enemy of this God is the God of the prophetic tradition, who is always conceived critically, precisely over against this deification of the power principle. Perhaps Christian faith and practice needs to reshape itself by immersion in the Hebrew prophetic tradition in which Jesus firmly stood. That means recovering the critical prophetic imagination to imagine a world of justice, compassion, non-violence, and the flourishing of all life. The shape of faith beyond Christendom is rooted in the prophetic imagination. Okay, we have an open plenary conversation. Who was the God of our national constitutions, our iconic documents and imperial mottos? And is this God now dead? And why do we return to the prophets and prophetic imagination to shape faith differently after the death of Christendom and of Christendom's God? A couple of questions there. Doesn't matter the order, or if there are others, let's have them. What do you think?